Please come to the stage, Tony Navarro and Bertil Chappuis. Tony leads Red Ventures in Puerto Rico. They drive innovation and strategic ventures, and he previously co-founded Nave Bank, where he was the inaugural CEO. Now, Bertil is the CEO of Xtillion, a database science and AI service firm based here in San Juan, and they got some stuff to show you with AI. So I'm not even gonna do anything else. Welcome to the stage, gentlemen.
With ChatGPT. That seemed to be the thing that really launched AI into the public consciousness. Like suddenly everyone was talking about it.
Oh, absolutely. September 2022. That was a turning point. ChatGPT emerged, and it felt like the future had arrived. People were blown away by its ability to hold conversations, write different types of creative text formats, even code.
Right. And then came that wave of investments. I mean, we're talking billions upon billions of dollars pouring into the AI sector.
Hyperscalers alone invested something like $52 billion in just 1 year. That's an incredible amount of money. But, and this is important, the influx of cash doesn't mean we've entered some AI utopia or that every problem is magically solved.
Yeah. And honestly, this is where I start to feel a little disillusioned. Like ChatGPT, as cool as it is, it gets things wrong, sometimes hilariously so. There are limitations.
Exactly. And this is where that hype cycle we talked about comes into play. There's this initial burst of excitement, everything seems revolutionary, and then reality sets in. The actual capabilities lag behind the expectations. And that's why I think events like the Icon conference are so interesting.
Okay, so you've mentioned Icon a couple of times. For those of us not familiar, what is it exactly?
It's a conference, obviously, but not your average tech gathering. This isn't about flashy product launches or hype.
It's more about substance.
Precisely. It brings together some of the brightest minds in AI who are focused on actual progress. People like Tony Navarro from Red Ventures.
And Bertil Chappuis from McKinsey and Xtillion.
Exactly. These aren't just tech guys. They're at the forefront of figuring out how to integrate AI into real-world businesses.
And what does that look like, practically speaking? Give us an example.
Well, Navarro, for instance, his work at Red Ventures focuses on using AI to personalize customer experiences online.
So, like, imagine fewer irrelevant ads and more tailored recommendations.
Exactly. And then you have Chappuis, who's looking at how AI can make large companies more efficient.
Potentially leading to better products and services.
Exactly. It's about finding practical solutions to real-world problems. And
So that you just heard was not a real podcast. That was a completely AI-generated conversation by a new Google model called Notebook LM. It's really Google's mini chat GPT moment. All we did to create that podcast was really enter a couple lines about what we wanted to talk about. It came up with the entire script. It created the dialogue, the prosody. And if we would have presented this maybe 5 years before, it certainly would have passed the Turing test. AI really is moving at a breakneck speed. We are entering a completely new epoch, I would say, an epoch, I would say. So lots ahead in an exponential future. But before we start talking about the future, it's really important that we level set and we understand the past as to how we got to where we are today. So on that note, Bertil, why don't you bring us to where we are today?
Yeah, buenos dias, good morning. So let me talk a little bit about the journey in AI over the last 60 years or so. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but I do think it's important to understand where we're coming from and where we are, and really stare at the capabilities that are now on the table so that we can all look at and develop a point of view on where this is going, because it's actually, there's actually quite a dispersion of views on where exactly AI will take us, and I think it's going to be incredibly relevant to all of us in our business, in our businesses and our organizations, as members of society, as parents. So it's really worth staring at this for a bit. So just quickly, if you look at the history of AI, AI really, the term AI started in 1956 at a conference at Dartmouth University. And for the next 40 years, AI went through a number of cycles of hype and disillusionment. And during that time, computing power grew exponentially. And that cycle was punctuated by an event in 1996, so 40 years later, when IBM's Deep Blue computer beat Garry Kasparov at chess. And the interesting thing is at that point, we were still telling computers what to do. So Deep Blue was programmed literally in a rule-based approach to play chess. And it was simply able to evaluate the number of positions much faster than Kasparov. So then for the next 15 years or so, a few things happened. First of all, computing power continued to grow exponentially based on Moore's law, which leads to a doubling of computing power every 18 months. The second thing is the internet was invented, and that essentially led to the digitizing of all human knowledge. And then third, cloud computing became a reality, which created an enormous scaling of that computing capacity and decentralized it. The result of all of that, plus some innovations that had been made starting in the 70s around neural networks, led to another pivotal kind of moment in computing history when around 2010, DeepMind, which Google had bought, beat the world champion at a game called Go, which many of you are probably not familiar with, but it's actually a Chinese game. And Go is a game that is infinitely more complex than chess. And the interesting thing, though, is the way that that DeepMind beat the world champion was not the way that Deep Blue had beat Kasparov. So we didn't program the computer with all the rules for chess. In the case of DeepMind, we simply we gave the computer the rules for Go, and DeepMind essentially played the game millions of times and learned the game itself, by itself. So this is a sort of a pivotal moment.
Yeah, no, interestingly enough, this moment is called the Sputnik moment in AI. Go is a deeply Chinese game. And there's a documentary, it's on YouTube, it's AlphaGo. I highly recommend it to everybody, it's good Friday night viewing. But that moment really set off the race toward artificial intelligence, specifically as it pertains to the Asia-China sphere with the US.
So that was that's kind of the moment where I think people started realizing the power of neural networks, which had been a promise back in the 70s, but now there was the computing capacity, the data to actually make this real and show a result. So we then, over the last decade, have had a continued increase in computing capacity, more and more data. And in 2022, as you all know, in September of 2022, ChatGPT came out, and it sort of amazed the world in terms of its ability to mimic sort of human language and what seemed like understanding and reasoning. So where we are today is we have this capability that is sort of a general purpose, it's general purpose technology that is starting to mimic human intelligence. And there's some real debates out there, even among the founders of the field, about where this goes. There are, I don't know if you saw last week, but the Nobel Prize in physics was given to Geoffrey Hinton and a professor at Princeton for their work on neural networks. And then the Turing Award, which is kind of the Nobel Prize in computer science, was given to Hinton and two other researchers. Even among that group, there's disagreement about where this goes. So Hinton, for example, believes that large language models already have understanding, that they can reason, that what we're seeing is actually real knowledge and intelligence. And Yann LeCun, who's another godfather of AI, completely disagrees. And he believes the models are just regurgitating what they've been trained on. I found it really amazing when ChatGPT came out. They asked the chief scientist at OpenAI how the model had come up with a particular result. And he said, well, actually, we don't know. We're not quite sure how it came up with it. And this is the thing I want you to really ponder is that, these are, and there's some books out there that may be worth reading. They're on complexity theory, but complexity theory posits that when you have a complex system, either biological or physical, one of the key characteristics of it, so we are complex systems, is that they have generative capabilities. They have emergent properties, meaning that the whole is larger than the sum of the parts, but in an unpredictable way. Okay, so think about that. The whole is unpredictably larger than the sum of the parts. These systems are doing things that we just set up the system. The system is now learning on its own, doing its own thing. As these systems get more and more complex, so right now ChatGPT is about, the parameter, the metric that's used is number of parameters, which is essentially the number think of it as the overall complexity of the system. We're at 1.8 trillion parameters. The human brain has about 100 trillion neurons. We're going to get there in about 5 to 7 years. So if these systems are already generating things that are not predictable, you can imagine at 100x what they'll be able to do. And that's really the thing to stare at and really understand and try to visualize, because what it means is we're not quite sure where this goes.
Yeah, and just to emphasize a little bit on the point that Bertil just brought up, last week the Nobel Prize in Chemistry and the Nobel Prize in Physics went to two groups, none of which were subject matter experts in those particular fields. They were AI researchers. That just shows you that the future is at the hand of humans aided with AI. And so how do we put this into a little bit more context here? OpenAI talks about the 5 stages of AI. The 5th stage, or really what we're trying to get to, is AGI, artificial general intelligence. That means that it's AI that's capable of completing tasks better or equivalent to any human. Actually, ASI is surpassing human capability. General intelligence is it's comparable. And I actually do have a quick graphic here. I'll jump back to this one. That shows you that the technologies are quickly approaching or exceeding human capability across many different fields. And in fact, we'll talk about the recent models, which are performing at a PhD level. So when we look at the different levels, Bertil walked us through what seemed to be like an overnight success. ChatGPT came out of nowhere, but it was decades in the making. This has been going on since the 1950s. We finally got the data, the compute, the algorithms to get to where we needed to be. And so level 1 is those chatbots, a natural language interface that we can now speak to machines and they can speak back to us. Now we've entered what is level 2. And OpenAI, a couple of weeks ago, actually more like a month ago, released a model called O1, OpenAI 1. And this is an entirely different kind of model. This is a reasoning model. And the best way to understand this is using Daniel Kahneman's structure. He's a Nobel-winning economist, and he described human thinking in 2 different systems. You have system 1, which is more about intuition, about instinct, about action, reaction. And then you have level 2, which is more about reasoning. You take a problem, you take it back, you think about it, you chew on it, and then you come out with a response or a solution. When we look at what this new model O1 is doing, if you were to ask ChatGPT, what is 2 plus 2, it'll likely say 4. But it may actually sometimes say 5, because what it's doing is predicting the next token. It's predicting the answer. It says, well, usually when I see 2 plus 2, I see a 5. I see a 4. But sometimes a 5 creeps in because it's a probability distribution. These new reasoning models actually think through it and will do a mathematical proof of why 2 plus 2 equals 4. So that lets these models do a couple of things. One, it has a chain of thought, much like humans do. They can think and reason through different problems. That also lets them plan. It lets them think through long-term, long-horizon tasks that are complex in nature. And so that's where we're going to start seeing agents coming about. What an agent is, and you're going to hear this word quite often, an agent is really an AI model that's capable of planning and executing autonomously. And so this is going to take us into a completely new type of environment, because now we have computers, software, that can navigate our environment, that can act on their own. And by the way, when I say our environment, it's both digital and physical. Digital in our sense, like we'll see that Siri is going to have exponential improvements over the coming years. Same with ChatGPT. But at the same time, we're going to start seeing things like humanoid robots. We're going to start seeing self-driving cars. Last week at Tesla, Elon Musk released, amongst other things, as you know, he plucked a rocket ship out of the sky, which was incredible. But he's also been releasing self-driving cars. He's releasing now humanoid robots. And it's funny because people always ask, like, why are robots, why do they look like a human? Why do always create them as anthropomorphic features? Well, the answer there is because the world is built for human figures. If you want a robot to get in a car, it better look like a human. If you want it to sit down, it should have the same kind of isomorphic shape as a human does. So we're going to see a lot of this. This is moving into level 3. That's when we give these models the ability to engage through APIs. We're not quite there yet, but we will be there very quickly. Then we get to number 4, which is what Bertil was alluding to with discovery, innovators. We're going to start seeing models that can discover on their own. We're going to see models that can do research, and they're going to be innovators. They're going to be inventing things that we had no idea. We're about to enter the next decade of exploration. It's the new renaissance, and it's an incredible time to be alive. And then level 5 really is about organizations. A group or swarm of agents capable of running what today would be the equivalent of a company. A company is really a group of people with a common goal. The same thing can happen using AI, creating a swarm of agents with a common goal or a common task that they have to accomplish. So a really exciting, daunting time. I did have a quick video, or a quick demo rather, that I wanted to show you all and how good these things are getting. I'm going to show you a video where I'm going to prompt, much like ChatGPT, a new type of interface, and I've accelerated twice, so it's going to look a little fast. But I took the agenda for Icon with all the speakers, and I told it to create an interface for me that also had a roulette feature, that when I clicked the roulette, it would pick out at random one of the sessions that I should attend. So this is a 45-second demo that I'll show you now, just so you get a sense for the capabilities and how quickly this is advancing. This is, by the way, this took me about a minute. Imagine what I can do in an hour. So I can't code a single line of code, and it built this for me, an interactive roulette wheel. I can click, the entire agenda's here in a scrollable fashion. I can pick day 1, I can pick day 2. This was done in about 45 seconds of my time, and these models, as they continue to get more and more impressive, here you see it, I click the wheel, and it's going to give us here an output. There you go. But these models are going to get so good, and the reason and they're going to continue evolving. The reason we believe that these models currently are on a straight line path for improvement is that we're not yet seeing any kind of limit. Much like in computer, you have Moore's law, and we have a similar law in AI. It's called the scaling laws. And the scaling laws, they posit that if we throw a lot of data, a lot of energy, and a lot of compute to a problem, the models are going to keep getting better. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And there are 2 parts of AI. There is training the model, right? So the more stuff we throw at this model, Bertil talked about parameters, we keep throwing data, we keep throwing compute, the model gets smarter. But then we also discovered with these reasoning models that there's also something called inference compute. And the more we let the models think, the more energy we throw at them, and the more data and the more time, the better response we're going to be able to get as well. And the thing is, we're not seeing any limits. And that's where you see OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Amazon, all these what are called hyperscalers investing billions of dollars into the resources to continue creating these models. And that brings us to the 3 constraints of what are we facing today. I think there's a 4th constraint, which is societal, and we'll talk about that shortly. But the 3 constraints right now are what is standing in our way of AGI or ASI. It is 1, energy. We're going to start seeing the rebirth of the energy sector, atomic energy, nuclear energy being a very good candidate, but certainly other areas are now burgeoning, and we're seeing a lot of activity there. We saw that 3 Mile Island was just reopened by Microsoft, of all companies. We are talking about data. And we found a loophole. We've essentially siphoned all the data in the world into these models. Now we can get the models to create their own data to train the other models on. And so we have synthetic data that we can continue feeding into these models. And then we have compute. And that's where you see companies like NVIDIA, like Cerebras, like Rock, and a bunch of other companies, AMD, that are now at sky-high valuations because these models are getting better, the compute is getting so much better, and so the technology is running way ahead. And it's moving quickly. But that is a blessing and a curse because at the same time, from a societal perspective, from an institutional perspective, We take time to adapt. The Industrial Revolution happened over decades, over centuries. This is happening in a matter of years. And so I do worry, Bertil, about how we as a society, how we as governments, as companies, are going to be able to absorb this capacity in a meaningful way.
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about, Tony and I thought about a few of the areas that we want to highlight for you in terms of the impacts. So, the first is every company in the world is going to have to, every organization in the world is going to have to go through a transformation that uses these capabilities, or it simply will be left behind and irrelevant. So if you look at the way IT systems work in a typical organization today, you have a bunch of structured data. So that's data that can be put in tables and so on, that sit in data warehouses and so on. And overlaid on that are enterprise systems, so ERP and CRM and all of that, spreadsheets you use, that essentially take that data and put it into workflows and you have employees that perform transactions on those. The new way of doing things is to actually combine the structured data with unstructured data. And unstructured data can be call scripts, it can be documents, it can be images, et cetera, and actually create modern data platforms that allow you to hold both data types in the same environment, and then overlay on that large language models and other tools that can actually interpret the context in which that data exists, that allow you to then perform functions, and eventually we're going to have agents that will perform the functions on their own. So let me give you a specific example that we're actually working on at Xtillion. And by the way, this is work being done by, Xtillion didn't exist a year ago. We're now 30 engineers in Santurce, and I think we'll be double that next year. And by the way, if anybody believes you can't attract talent to Puerto Rico, those 30 folks, 10 of them came from the US, from Meta, Bloomberg, Capital One, NASA, MIT, Georgia Tech, master's degrees, and then a bunch of folks from Mayagüez. And by the way, Mayagüez is unbelievable. So what are we doing? So take in healthcare, you take the process of processing a claim. So today you have folks reading documents, inputting them, putting them into databases, and other systems retrieve that data, et cetera. What we're doing is we're essentially automating all of that using the architecture that I just described, where you change the fundamental data infrastructure of the company to hold all the documents, all the structured data, everything. So we have every policy document, every internal process document, every database with structured data, all accessible and available in the same architecture. And now you take large language models that can interpret human language, and you can have a human being actually say, what was the reason claim X was processed the following way, and you'll get an answer, right? Or you can create an agent that will actually take a claim, take all the data, put it in a table, have another agent that takes that data plus the rules from a document, from a policy document, and execute actions on it, and then send an email to the client, right, with the response. So you essentially are able, because you're able to both combine all these data types and use the ability to interpret human language, you're able to automate these processes essentially almost end to end. I will say that I am a believer that this will augment human capability, not completely replace it, but we'll get to that. So you can imagine this type of approach will flow through almost everything that an organization does, right? Whether it's supply chain or sales or pricing or call centers, everything's going to be impacted by this. Now, obviously, this is going to lead to massive dislocations in the job market. And the question is, will it be primarily replacement and automation or augmentation? And I mean, history is kind of a good place to go to look at what's happened in the past with other technological waves. And if you look over the last couple of hundred years, technology has actually mostly resulted in the augmentation of human beings. And the metric to look at that kind of proves the point is that the value of an hour of labor has actually grown tenfold since 1820. And the reason is, think of it, right? A worker with a bulldozer is much more valuable than a worker with a shovel, right? So, there is hope here that even if there is disruption, that at the end of the day, this will actually lead to to actual growth in wealth and value for the economy, and eventually more, not fewer jobs. Now, there's no guarantee of that. It may be that this time it's different because we're dealing with a fundamentally different phenomenon.
I mean, there certainly is a lot of turmoil, right? We saw three things, or I'll call out three things that happened very quickly. We had the Hollywood strike last year, which was all about using Gen AI for script writing or for VFX. We just recently had the longshoremen strike, which if you Google the images of the longshoremen strike, they have T-shirts, longshoremen, that say no to automation, robots don't have families to feed. Right? That's certainly concerning. And then third, you see all these self-driving cars getting vandalized left and right by taxi drivers or even Uber drivers. So really interesting sign of what's to come, but just pointing out the turmoil that's going to happen.
Yeah. The other area is regulation, right? It's really, I mean, this is moving so fast that, I mean, governments are really having a hard time keeping ahead of the curve. I mean, there's already about 25 bills that have been enacted in the U.S. related to AI, and there's hundreds of bills between the U.S. at the federal, state level, globally, a lot in Europe, because of the privacy concerns and that they're particularly acute in Europe. But regulation is really going to be a big area of focus over the next few years here. But it's tough. I mean, when you have models where explainability is, if I go back to my earlier points, where explainability is an issue, how do you regulate it, right? I mean, in banking, where you have rules around how you validate models, the Fed has guidance in banking around how to evaluate a model based on evaluating inputs, the rules, and the outputs. But it's a completely different world when you're talking about generative AI, right? So there's going to be a lot happening there. And then, globally and geopolitically, there's a real arms race happening already between, this is a game really between the U.S. and China. If you look at the Stanford AI Index, the U.S. has put out 60 major models in the last few years, kind of foundational models. China has put out 15, France 8, Germany 5. So it's really a game between the U.S. and China. And you're going to see massive investment because it's not just critically important from an economic standpoint, but militarily, you're talking about enormous implications. And I think the big thing to keep an eye out for on that front is the fact that to date, in the U.S., for example, I mean, the DoD has a rule around not allowing for the use of AI in military in arms without human intervention. But in my view, it's a matter of time before that constraint gets released, because you have motivated adversaries, right, in China and Iran and Russia, who I don't think are going to follow those principles. So how far are we from having AI-enabled robots in the battlefield, and what are the implications of that? A drone, an armed drone with facial recognition, right? Imagine the implications of that. So we're going to see massive risks and issues on the geopolitical military front. And then lastly, I think on the issue of identity, and Tony, I'll turn over to you because you know a lot more about this than me, but all the issue of individual identity in the world of deep fakes and so on is another whole front that we're going to deal with.
Yeah, it's a topic I think about often, and there are really two facets to the issue of identity in a world of AI. On one end, there's a notion of deepfakes. We use our biometric signals every day to identify ourselves, whether it be for a banking transaction using our voice, or using Face ID to unlock our phones, or various other things. And we've entered the realm of cloning, where it is very simple. I can very easily clone anybody's voice with about 15 seconds, and that's a high fidelity clone sample of anybody's voice. And I can obtain that, by the way, off of a YouTube interview that you may have done, or your voicemail for that matter. And so we've entered the realm of do not believe what you see or hear. Always approach it with a little bit of healthy cynicism and caution. The good news is that the technology to detect deepfakes is very good. And deepfakes are littered with errors and issues that technology can't pick up. The bad news is that humans are horrible at detecting deepfakes. So if you get a call from your child or your wife or spouse saying, hey, send me blank $100 because my car got whatever, I got a flat tire, and it sounds like your wife, you're going to react to that emotionally. And that's really where things happen. There's been scams already of imposters showing up on Zoom and tricking the CFO of companies of wiring millions of dollars over to somebody's bank account. And then there's a notion of, so I'll leave you on a positive note there, technology is good, humans bad, so we need to be a little bit more discerning ourselves. And then on the issue of identity, think of the impact that social media had on our world, which was about discovering your social network, about discovering and living life vicariously through your friends or through your peers or whatnot. We are entering an age now where we will have synthetic friends. I guarantee everybody in this room, and you may laugh a little bit, but everybody in this room will have an AI companion within the next 2 to 3 years that you will regularly talk to, engage with, consult. And I myself find myself talking to ChatGPT in the car, and I realize that I've been talking to myself. Right? I have the fiction that I've been talking to somebody, but it's actually myself. And it's very helpful, think through problems or whatnot. But it's a very bizarre notion. But we're entering that phase of synthetic reality. And the reality that you choose to live can be in the organic world, or eventually with AR, VR, people will decide to live in completely fabricated realities. So I think it's another area we need to navigate carefully and really... especially when we start talking about children and education and all that, we start getting to a bit of a rabbit hole. But on that note, and I know we're out of time, Bertil, why don't we just kind of wrap it up? What are some of the takeaways you would leave the audience with?
No, I mean, I would just end with some advice that you spend some time really digging into AI and learning. I tell my clients, the C-suites at our clients to develop a 20-hour AI curriculum for the executive suite to just get the basics of understanding. The second is to start experimenting. I mean, most of you probably use ChatGPT already. That's one, but just experiment with it, work with it, because it takes some time to just get the intuition around this stuff, and it's going to be incredibly relevant to everything you do, the way you raise your children, the way you think about the future. So this is the time to actually set aside some thinking time and some reading, and not just let it pass by. So that's what I would end with. I don't have time for Q&A, but
yeah, well, I echo everything Bertil said. This is a world where I think theory is helpful, applied knowledge is better. Get in there, get dirty, roll your sleeves up, get to know it. And from an education perspective, I get the question often: what would you do with your children? What should your children learn in the age of AI? And I would say, teach them how to learn. They need to be insatiable, curious, have range in learning. The future of specialized knowledge will disappear as we lean incrementally on technology. And our children and ourselves need to become very curious, learning that range. But in closing, Bertil and I decided to become music writers. So we just wanted to share one of our little songs that we put together for you.
Bertil from Xtillion, Tony by his side, discussing AI with futures collide. In Puerto Rico, icons are mixing. They brought visions, bright and serene. Listen.
All right, I'll end it there. I'll put it on Spotify so you can all download it. All right, we have time for a couple questions from the audience, so if you wouldn't mind, raise your hand. Yes, we can hear. We can hear you. I'll repeat the question.
Thank you. Very interesting. I wanted to know, I know one of you guys is in Red Ventures. Which one of you guys is? In terms of media, I know that you guys do a lot of media. What implications do you see in terms of, we haven't gotten to what you're describing, and we're already talking about fake news. People don't know what to believe. It's very hard. In terms of media, what would the implications be? What do you see how you're going to be handling the credibility of your organization and your media outlets?
Absolutely, it's a great question. In a world where content is commoditized, and in a world, and it's not unlike social media, by the way, where we can create a lot of fictitious news, and as what happened in the last U.S. election, but trust will be increasingly relevant and the most important asset that many of us have, our brand name, our company's brand, and being able to have, to point back to the methodology, the rigor, and the trust that with which we conduct our job. In Red Ventures, we have a lot of content, and we very rigorously test all of our content. We also have bylines. We put journalists behind every one of our pieces. And so it's a very, it is a tricky future, but to that point, it's all about having developing that trust in that brand, which will be most important. And at the same time, that's what makes it differentiated, right? The brands of the future that will survive will offer a unique proposition that is highly differentiated, that can offer a unique experience to customers, and that the brand stands ahead of it, because it's all about, when I can code, like I just showed you earlier, technology no longer becomes a really strong moat. Distribution and brand and trust are the real moat in the future.
Thank you for a great panel, and I'm very interested in your thoughts around the data conversation, and perhaps the gap that there is in talking hand in hand about AI, data governance, data infrastructure, security, zero trust, and other topics that I think, particularly in Puerto Rico, there's a pretty big gap and perhaps some opportunity areas on how government and industry can work together and seize these opportunities from a governance perspective. And you mentioned regulation as a kind of global topic that's being discussed in many countries, and definitely looking to the US for leadership in this space. But can you speak a little bit more about how the need for data governance, data science skill set gap that we see here in Puerto Rico, how can we kind of leapfrog in this space? Because there's conversations about AI in every sector, vertical, from industry to the social sector, government, of course, and the utilities within government on leveraging, as we think about the fourth industrial revolution, and it was spoke to in the opening panel, the data conversation, I don't see it as much in the forefront as I see the AI conversation advancing, and it's depending on a foundation. So can you speak more to where you see the gaps and opportunities in that space?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree with you more. So Xtillion was actually started exactly for that reason. The recognition that, there is no AI without data, right? The whole point is with AI is you're training models on data. And so if you don't have your data in order, if that data is not accessible, secure, scalable, et cetera, you can't apply the models. So you need, the data work requires a set of skills around data engineering, like you said, data governance, et cetera, that is different from data science. It's sort of a different field. And there's a big supply-demand imbalance in the world with those skills. It's not just here. Even in the US, when we work with clients, when you have engineering teams that are, if you have teams that, even folks with 4 or 5 years of experience within companies are not up to speed on some of these technologies. So I think we're going to see a massive need to retool and retrain. I think what Manolo Cedar and the team at DDEC have done with the 21st Century Tech Force Fund is, for example, a great investment. They are pushing, I mean, they're investing a lot in a set of programs to enable some of these skills. But we just need, we talk about Puerto Rico, we just need to create the jobs. We need to train people, and we have to recognize the opportunity that lies ahead from that supply-demand imbalance, and just really make a push for it. It's a big gap.
Hi, thanks for sharing. I'm an owner of a knowledge-based business. I'd love to do this. Where do I begin? How do I start?
What would you say? Hire a couple. I mean, you need to. I think this is an area where you can start experimenting at a small scale with one or two technical resources, and it's the number of tools out there now that allow you to do a huge amount with very little manpower is pretty amazing. I mean, some of the stuff that Tony was showing up there, some of the tools, like our engineers use engineering co-pilot technology that allows them to code at a blistering pace, right? So you're actually able, with few people, you can do a lot if you have the right folks. So I would say, and initially you can contract for it, right?
Well, I would even take it a step earlier. These models off the shelf are very helpful. So I would recommend you go on, there are three really that I recommend. Go on ChatGPT, but the paid, please, everybody here, pay for ChatGPT. Don't get the free version. You get like 5-fold increase in intelligence by using the premium service. There's another one called Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which I also recommend, or Gemini. Upload and make sure you go into settings, turn off data sharing, and that way your data is safe. You're not training the models. There's no regurgitation back into the training data set. And once you do that, start testing out what is it you would like to see from an AI tool do. If you were to upload a contract, is it capable of finding the key terms that you would want the tool to do for you? And if you can properly do that using an off-the-shelf tool like a ChatGPT, then that's a time to engage a third party and say, hey, I did these couple of things and it worked decently well. I would like to now implement it in a workflow or some kind of an enterprise tool that I could deploy within my own business. But you'd be amazed at how much you can try and test with one-off shots using these off-the-shelf models. So I would recommend first experiment on your own, make sure you can kind of figure out a workflow on your own, and if that works, engage a third party to see, or engage a third party and get an opinion right up front as well. But you can do a lot on your own without being technical.
That's all the time that we have for this panel right now. Big round of applause for them.